Hey, folks, welcome to the Battles of the First World War podcast. So, returning to the podcast today are two good friends, and I kind of use that loosely with one person, James, and fellow World War I historians. Just kidding. First up, first up on the podcast today are James Gregory, awesome guy, now director of the LSU Military Museum at Louisiana State University. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And then we have Steve Girard, a U.S. Army veteran and veteran battlefield guide. James is also a University of Oklahoma PhD candidate. Is that correct? Okay,
Yep.
Cool. All right. As well as already the author of several books, the most recent being Unraveling the Myth of Sergeant Alvin York, the other 16. Steve has studied the American Expeditionary Force for several decades. And I know I've said it before, folks, but I'm going to say it again, decades, okay? He's been the unit historian for the U.S. Army 2nd and 4th Infantry Divisions, the 10th Mountain Division, 101st Airborne Division, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments. Steve has also served as a special historical consultant, World War I, to the History Division, for the Marine Corps out in Quantico, Virginia. Steve has also worked as a historian and researcher for World War I, 4th Brigade, Marine 2nd Division, for various military historians and authors like Mr. George B. Clark, Mr. Kevin Selden, James Gregory, Lieutenant Colonels Pete Owen and John Swift, both retired, Lieutenant Colonel Walt Ford, Marine Corps, retired, and Mr. Mike Miller. So, gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. It's kind of cool because we get to have James and I together for the first time. So
yeah,
that's really great on that end.
Yeah.
What's this put me at now for being on your podcast? Are we at 5, 6?
I think we're up to like 7, man.
Yeah, it's gotta be at least 6. At least 6. Yeah.
I think you're the most. You're the highest number of visits to the podcast, or most times that you've been on.
Okay, well, I'll hold on to that. Can you send me a plaque? Kind of like how YouTube sends plaques to people. You go ahead and send me one. I'll put it up.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, we'll get that going. I'm having it printed up on cafepress.com. So.
Oh, good. All right.
All right. A note to folks watching this YouTube video. All right. So, and I don't have my usual background of beautiful World War I books. Mrs. BF WWP and the BF WWP child have kicked me out of my office. So I'm in the kitchen. However, we still have a World War I theme going because that victory in the kitchen is a British World War I propaganda poster. So still got the street cred going. All right. Just a little bit of admin notes there. Okay. So today, guys, we are here to talk about the U.S. 7th Infantry Regiment, which took part in the Battle of Belleau Wood, for Belleau Wood, fighting in Belleau Wood. Okay. So one thing I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is James and Steve, you guys work together pretty often. You guys, have worked together on various articles. And you guys are kind of like World War I Mythbusters. So it's pretty cool. So you guys have done the same.
Yeah, well, that's true because James and I both got a nasty habit of telling the truth, and some people out there in the world don't like. Ooh, yeah.
But you guys have, we've talked about Sergeant York. We've talked about the Marines at Blankmont. Now we're going to talk about a U.S. Army regiment fighting in Belleau Wood, which I checked my Belleau Wood episodes, and I'm pretty sure that I missed it as well completely. I don't think I mentioned the 7th Infantry being in there at all. So that's a failure on my part that we'll rectify here today.
No, Mike, it's common because a lot of people don't really know about them being there. And how this got started was with James came up for his award ceremony.
Yep.
For the Heinel Award. and we were at Great Research Center, and we were kind of waiting there, and James like, "Hey man, what do you think would be pretty good for future articles?" And it's something that I witnessed when I was at Amarn for the 100th anniversary, and I say, you know what you really want to do, man? If you really want to do it, is you need to tell the story about what happened to the 7th Infantry Regiment at Belleau Wood, because the misconception is just a Marine-oriented battle, but the 7th kind of got kicked to the curb during the battle and afterwards. I said, and that's what I told James, that would be something that you really want to do. And I had something, information and stuff like that. And James got a hold of me and said, you know what, let's do it. And we did. And like I said, working with James is probably the best thing I could ever have happen, because he's like a little Oklahoma pit bull, because he can tell you, because he gets his teeth into it. He ain't gonna let go until you swat him in the nose or pour hot water on him. But he's not gonna joke. He's not gonna play around. He's not gonna he tells it the way it is. That's why I got a lot of love and respect for what he does. But yeah,
these whole stories of being Mythbusters. I mean, that's my whole reputation now. I mean, especially after Alvin York, and then as he said, I was there for that Heinel Award when we talked about Blockmont, and that was the whole myth about the Marines retreating, and then the article we worked on for Verdun discussed the fact, like, devil dogs. That's a myth.
Right.
Things like that. So it seems to be the reputation. But what I found so interesting about it, and especially with this, which I know we're not going to talk about much today, but the second half of the article is the reaction, that these other men have at the end of the war to being left out of the story. They just suffered through 8 days of Belleau Wood, and all the newspapers say, or the Marines captured the wood, and they forget everyone, all the way up to now when it's, your podcast. You didn't know it because it's not in most of the history books.
Yeah, I just scanned the text really quick, and I think I knew that the Army was also in there, but I'm pretty sure I missed this whole.
Yeah, well, and most people think about the other Army units in the 2nd Division, that were a part of. I mean, the 2nd Engineers are technically in Belleau Wood too. You've got Army units there, but no one thinks that the 3rd Division came in for a week and carried the battle and then turned it back over to the Marines. So it's one of those things. It's interesting what we remember and what we forget.
Right.
And my question is always, why? Why did we forget about the 7th Infantry, which is, kind of where the story went? Because originally it was supposed to be telling the story, but when I started the research, that was a little bit of it, but I was really curious as to why. Why is it gone? Why did it disappear? And how did they react? So there's a lot to it, but this myth busting thing's been a lot more fun. Even though some people, get mad and send death threats, it's okay.
Comes with the territory, I guess. I mean, I say Mythbusters, like half humorously, like, and obviously I respect.
I mean, I love the show, so I'm gonna take it as that.
I greatly respect your guys' work, and you're taking the time out to come here on the podcast, and we can talk about these things. And I always find, man, that like when you do your myth busting thing, like it I don't know, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't take away from the story. It rather, it adds to it. It makes it more human, So like the York Patrol, hearing the whole story of the entire 17-man patrol, York included, like that makes it a much more human story. Hearing the Marine Corps at Blancmont, like of course, like that makes it so much more real. I mean, I know the story's real already, but if I can just,
you got to have the personal perspectives.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. All my work is personal perspectives. I hate the top down. I don't care what the general is doing, and I don't care what the overall battle is. I want to know what Captain Carter says, what he experienced, what he saw.
Yeah.
And that tends to reveal those little stories you don't think about.
Yeah, exactly. Steve?
Well, and that's the thing, because like, when I think this story kind of gets neglected is because when you go to France, Mike, you and I both know, you go up to Normandy or Belleau Wood. Those are the two big, attraction battlefields for the Americans in France.
Yep.
And when you get all the Marines, there, it's Belleau Wood's like their mecca. But the thing is, like I said, it's the 7th has their bragging rights as well.
Yep.
And the thing is, they get neglected, and it was just dumb blind luck when George Clark did Devil Dogs in his book. He was kind of the first author to really go. He didn't go into depth like what James and I did. What James said, he's going in there and he's telling the personal side of things. George gave like a little brief, but it was pretty good. But like maybe about 3-4 pages. He talked about the 7th operation there in mid-June of 18.
Mm-hmm.
Then it gets handed over back to the Marines. But other than that, that's it. It's like, okay, hey, we're out of here. And like you said, it's kind of a travesty too. Is when you go out to Aimar American Cemetery, there's no memorials out there for the 7th Infantry. There's none. It's like totally erased from the history. And then when guys go out there to do staff rides and battlefield walks or whatever, yeah, it's they talk about the 2nd Division and particularly the 4th Brigade of Marines, but the 7th, it's like they were never there. And that's why James was really good at what he does and did on this article, because he's trying to right a wrong. He's trying to say, yeah, these guys, yes, they were there and they deserve the accolades and honors that the 4th Brigade and the 2nd Division has, because the 7th, even though they were a unit from the 3rd Division, they still were under operation control of the 2nd for X amount of days. So I mean, they had that honor as well, and it should be told, and told correctly, and as accurately as you can get it. And that's what James did with this article.
Cool. Steve, so on that, can you set the scene for us here? So what causes the U.S. 7th Infantry Regiment, which belonged to the 3rd Division, to be called into the battle for Belleau Wood? Okay,
so what happened is, give just a little bit history on the 7th, not much, but 7th Infantry, 7th U.S. Infantry Regiment is one of the first 5 regiments standing with the U.S. Army. Came into existence in 1798, became fully stood up in 1808, and their battle honors go from War of 1812, Mexican War, Civil War, Spanish-American War, and Philippines insurrection. And they were stationed in either Colorado or Wyoming when the war broke out in 17. And they got orders to report to Camp Green, North Carolina, because they're going to be part of the newly formed 3rd Division, and that's where 3rd Division was at. So, the beginning of 1918, because it's a mad rush to get troops, to the French theater of operations, so they had to wait their turn like everybody else. So, in late March of 18, the 3rd Division gets their movement orders, and they start to move out, and they're moving up to the port of embarkation area at Hoboken, New Jersey, and they get put on 3 American transports, naval transports. That's the America, the Agnemon, and the Great Northern, and that's April 6th. And they leave the port of embarkation at Hoboken, and they arrive in the AEF port of debarkation at Brest on April 16th. Then they're at Brest for about 2 or 3 days. Then on April 18th, the 7th is put on 48 rail cars, and they're taken up to the 2nd French Corps training area just outside of Chaumont, which ended up being AEF headquarters. So 7th going in, and like I said, they detrain at Brycon, which is in the literally just outside of Chateauvillion. And from there, the division is piecemealed out to different training areas. And the 7th happened to be in what was the name of the town? Bras, Villeneuve, Manu, St. Martin's, in that area in there. So they're in train up. So this is probably about like the beginning of probably about mid-April to the end of April of 18. So then, so while this is going on, this is when the Germans decide to pull the spring offensive towards Paris. And so the 7th, like I said, they're all around these surrounding areas, and they're being trained in the art of war for that particular period. And they're starting to get word's starting to come down through channels and whatever, that the Germans got an offensive going, and they're pushing the French up against the wall. And then probably late May is when all hell breaks loose. And mind you, the 3rd Division as a whole is still in training. Okay, so you got all these units that are piecemealed out to different French units. And then what was it on this is May 31st, the 7th Infantry gets their orders to move out. And they're going to be under temporary control of the French 20th Division. And so the first unit out is 3rd Battalion. That's under Rollo Ditto. So they get on the rail cars, and they're taken to what's the name of the town? It starts with a C. Courtesy. It's just east of Chateau Thierry. It's over on the Marne River. It's over by the Bend. And so 3rd Battalion is detrained there. They get pushed up, and the 2nd and 3rd Battalion is coming in right behind them. And so 1st and 3rd Battalion and regimental headquarters are at Genève Farm, which is just south of Chateau Thierry on the south bank. And from there, what was it? They're going to hold the line per se. So I think the furthest unit up north was up near Varennes, and that was I think it was had to be either 1st or 3rd Battalion was up there, and they're going down the river bend. So you had one battalion near Varennes, Revelli, and Courton. I can't pronounce that damn name. So they're basically all along the river bend. So then from there, that's about the beginning of June. So up there for till about the 8th or 9th of June. And what was it? They're doing patrolling actions and stuff in there. 3rd Battalion actually had an officer that was awarded Distinguished Service Cross and Croix de Guerre for doing a couple of heroic acts up there. Then about on the 9th of June, the 7th got orders to pull out the lines because the lines are starting to get their act together. They're trying to contract, because the 3rd Division is, like I said, all these units are trying to get up in there along with the French. So it's sort of like what happened with the 2nd when they got into their sector. So they're trying to sort things out. So it's decided to take the 7th and pull them off the lines. And what they're going to do is they're going to go to Sasseny-sur-Marne, which is probably about maybe 7 to 10 miles southwest of Chateau Thierry. And they're placed under the operational control of the French 167th Division. And there's 6 river bridges across the Marne River. And they're going to be there. They're going to guard the lines of supplies and communication area up in there. And they're there from like late of the 9th, 9th and 10th of June, all the way to June 15th. And on June 15th, that's when they get the notification that they're going to be assigned to the 2nd Division. And that's how the 7th gets involved in the Battle of Belleau Wood. So that's how that plays out.
All right, awesome, thank you. So I think these next questions are gonna be more for James here, man. But Steve, feel free to add, of course. So how experienced were those doughboys of the 7th when they entered the front line? We know they've been in the line. One officer's already received Distinguished Service Cross and everything. But overall, is the unit still? Are they still pretty green, pretty raw?
And they're relatively inexperienced. Yeah, they've had a little bit of action there on the Marne, but they get pulled out, right in the middle. So they've only been there 2 weeks before they get pulled out. So relatively inexperienced. They're not completely green right off the boat, but
yeah,
they're not. Well, I mean, like, especially when we compare them to the 2nd Division, the 2nd Division's already had 2 months in the Verdun sector with a lot of combat. So a lot of those guys are already well experienced combat veterans. So in comparison, the 7th is not.
Okay. All right. So 7th Regiment gets called in, to relieve the Marines. By this time, we're talking June 15th. So the initial assault on Belleau Wood took place on June 6th, 1918. So that battle's already been raging now for some 9 days. And obviously the Marines need some relief. 7th Infantry comes in. What did the battalions of the 7th do once they relieved the Marines inside Belleau Wood?
Well, so you get the entire 7th Infantry coming in, and you're right, it's been 2 weeks. People like to talk about the Marine Corps in this, 28 days of combat. But if we're going to be completely honest, it's only 20 because 8 days of the 7th Infantry. But they're tired. They need rest. So the 7th Infantry, the entire 7th Infantry comes in. So whenever they finally get in, the night of the 17th is when the battalions start to move in. The 3rd Battalion sets up on the left side, the 1st Battalion in the middle, 2nd Battalion on the right. And they set up, in the woods, northern section. Now, the 2nd Battalion is going to have a little bit of an easier time than the 1st and 3rd because where it's positioned, it's got more open ground, so there's not a whole lot of vicious fighting in the woods. But they've just replaced the Marines who've been trying to take this northern section of the wood, and they cannot. The Marines have not been able to dislodge the Germans. So the 7th Infantry is called in to take up their lines, right there on the northern section.
Right.
And I should say that when they took it over, as part of the article, is that northern section was very well fortified. I mean, it's the last vestige of the Germans' holdout. Right. And so they've got machine gun emplacements, but there's also a lot of interesting comments that, and I'll just read what Captain Walter Flannery from Company M, 7th Infantry, what he said of what he saw.
Yep.
Speaking of these personal experiences. He said, it was a thick wood, and it's been subjected to heavy bombardment for the last 2 weeks. So you've got trees that are, 12, 15 inches in diameter destroyed. But you got to think about the logistics that where they've fallen, that makes it almost impassable, right? You can't really get through this wood. And so what the Germans have done is that since they were already in the wood, they've been moving the trees and basically creating lanes of fire. So the only way for the Marines and then the 7th Infantry to advance is up these rows directly at the German strong points.
Right.
So he says, when our bunch went over the top, there were only tiny lanes between where these trees lay through which our men could advance. And since the Germans had been there first, they took advantage of the fact and had set machine guns down each one of them. So that's what they're facing. And not only this northern part of the woods, and Stephen, correct me if I get it wrong, but there's several sections of here that are rocky hills and rocky outcrops that the Germans have also fortified. So it's not just
you're right on it, man. Okay. That north part built, yeah. I mean, it's rocky.
Yeah. So you've got fortified strong points throughout the northern section, and the 7th Infantry has now been put in there, relatively green, and said, "Good luck. Go take that."
Wow. All right. All right. So, I have my next question here is like giving us an overview of the seventh time at Belleau Wood. I think you just set that up, which is like, you know, those rocky outcroppings with the machine guns on top. Like, go take
Mhm.
those.
Dense underbrush, ravines. I mean, it's going to be, and it's only 8 days, but it is a hellacious 8 days.
Yeah, yeah. So they're in the line for 8 days. So can you talk to us about like I'm going to kind of blend the next two questions
Sure.
here. So we're talking like what kind of casualties are they facing? Like they're attacking these positions. What's the support situation like for the 7th Infantry? Like,
Oh,
are they getting?
okay, so
Go ahead.
coming in then, the 7th Infantry, you know, the Marines are working with the French, but the Marines are the ones in charge. So the 7th Infantry is given to the 4th Brigade.
Okay.
And so the Marines are supposed to be providing the support, and also the 2nd Division is supposed to be providing the artillery support. You know, they're supposed to be helping them. But what happens is that the 2nd Division basically leaves them out to dry. The Marine leadership drops the ball. I think they're also there, and there's a lot of animosity between the two, as they don't want the army to come in and secure the point they've been trying to take. So that's a part of this play, but they're supposed to be supported. The ammunition dumps, the food, the water.
Right.
The Marines back out and they take all their supplies with them. So when the 7th Infantry is trying to find food, trying to find water, trying to find ammo, they have to go 2-3 miles in the back of the lines to even find some, and they don't even get it. They don't get enough. So there's a lot of accounts of these guys, like the only water they got is what they collected when it rained, that they'd collect it from their pent halves and hold the water, that they only found 40 pieces of bread for the entire battalion. It's not a good situation. The Marine Corps is dropping the ball, and this leads to a lot of that animosity after the war because of the failure of the Marine Corps to support the 7th Infantry, which we'll talk about later too. As part of that, where the Marines start to say, "Well, you didn't capture the point," and the 3rd Division is trying to say, "Well, yeah, because you didn't support us. You know, we didn't have anything." So some of the losses they took. I mean, let's just do that. It's the first night they're there, right? Company B attempted to have an advance down the line, and they hit such forces. They 5 killed, 16 wounded first night. Well, in the next morning, Paul Carter, Captain Carter, hell of a man. He's in Company C. He leads an attack of about 60 volunteers. So he called for volunteers. So men from A, B, and C companies joined him, and they pushed forward. Well, as soon as they got up there, again, it's just a hellish point. They don't have any artillery support, and it stalled. The men fell back. So he came back, and then he got more volunteers from Company D. Tried it again, but once again they held the position. So that was the next day. 11 killed, 45 wounded, 7 missing. All right, so we're only on 2 days, and we've already got a lot of casualties.
Right.
And a lot of these that happen, I mean, some of the stories that we included in there are really interesting. Ernest Rauch from Company A, he got hit by a bullet, and one of them, they said it kind of carved a groove into his head. But when he came to, he tried to like find the American lines, and he walked into the German lines and was captured. But other thing, I mean, they kept trying to push. They only had to hold on. The reality was they just had to hold their grounds, which they did. They did not lose an inch of ground during those 8 days, but they tried multiple times to make these attempts. So you had those first 2 attacks, not much going on till the end of the week. And then you've got Frank Adams, who's the commander of the 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry. He gets a note from Brigadier General Hubbard from the 4th Brigade saying, and I'll quote it, "You have but one more opportunity to take the machine gun position and redeem themselves for the failure of the previous night." So he's sending these messages to the 7th Infantry saying, "You're a failure, essentially. You need to redeem yourself." Every time they have an attack, there's no artillery, there's no support.
Yep.
And they've requested it. They're told they'll get it, and then it never comes, or it's never long enough, or, you know, all these things. So June 20th, they take a final attempt to make an attack, and he requested heavy artillery, which was granted. All right, they could have taken this position, so they withdraw. a kilometer in preparation, let the heavy artillery come down. Well, all of a sudden, they get to the middle of the night, bombardment never comes. There's no bombardment whatsoever. So now that they've withdrawn from their positions and there's no bombardment. So now the attack has to begin. The men have to stumble through the dark, get back to their original positions, and then lead the attack. Well, unfortunately, like Company B drifted too far left, it never found its objective. Companies A and C advanced up the hill, but they were pushed back by heavy German resistance because there was no artillery.
Right.
And in some parts of the woods, you have this really horrible point where the Germans were letting these men walk into traps. So Carl Helm, First Lieutenant Carl Helm of Company A, they advanced to the top of this rise. They got up to one of these, and there was not a shot fired. And he thought, okay, the Germans have fallen back. We're good. So his men all come into this position, and all of a sudden, it's an ambush from all sides. Wipes out his company. And there's also several accounts of Germans wearing American uniforms and walking into American lines, trying to convince them, stop shooting, you're killing your own men, and then getting killed in the process. And that comes from even Brigadier General Hubbard records that. So you have this treachery from the Germans. You have no assistance from the Marine Corps, no ammunition, no food, no water, and you get no artillery support. And they keep, pushing the 7th Infantry along. Come on, why don't you take it, But they don't provide anything. So after those 8 days, all right, let's say the 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry suffered 337 casualties. All right, just the 1st Battalion, which is 25% of its strength. The 1st Battalion lost 25% of its men.
Right.
In 8 days. And a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that the Marine Corps did not support the 7th Infantry. There's one, Private Frank Dallas, he mentioned that they fought well. Not every night they fought. For every 10 Americans killed, the Germans gave up 30 dead. So they felt like this was a brutal moment. But let me find this one quote from one of the leaders.
Sure.
So actually, I should mention that this is a Marine, Private Claude Romine from the 82nd Company, 6th Regiment. When he went in to relieve the 7th Infantry, he wrote back in a letter, "We went back to Belleau Wood and we found the 7th Infantry almost wiped out. They had no horses, no artillery. They didn't know where to go or what to do, but they were still fighting the best they could." So the 7th Infantry is absolutely weak. The 7th Infantry is, sitting here with no support, and they are decimated. And then the Marines come in at the end of this 8 days, fully fed, well rested, ready to go. Lieutenant Colonel Adams does write in his report of his action in 7th Infantry, which I think is a very poignant discussion. He said, "The troops under my command were green men. They were under a terrific artillery fire, harassed by aeroplanes, and in direct observation. It was difficult to procure food and water, and the general conditions were such as to make the most experienced troops nervous. Our line was thinly held, our supports were nil, and our ability to hold the line, should it be attacked in force, doubtful. Laboring under these handicaps, the attack was made, as ordered, and was a failure. 2 days later, another attack was ordered, with the promise of heavy artillery preparation. The battalion made the attempt, but the absolute lack of the promised artillery preparation made the attempt abortive and caused heavy casualties without any military result." All right. So, go ahead.
No, I got a question there. So, and this can be for both of you gentlemen. So, that. Okay, so on that last night, 7th Infantry requests the heavy barrage, and it's received, and
And granted,
and 2nd Division's like, you got it. You need heavy artillery. It's coming in. So where is how could there be a break in communication from even to the point where the order gets granted, but it's somehow, where's the break in the granting of the fire mission? But it doesn't get down to the guns themselves.
that's the $1 million question.
I honestly, because this is something that James and I've been talking about when we were doing the research on this article. I think the break happened at Brigade. That's where I honestly think the break happened, because when James laid everything out, dealing on the shoulders of James Hubbard, the thing is with General Hubbard, it was his first command in theater, and the prestige of his guys, his brigade of Marines to go in there and take that wood. I think he didn't want the 7th to have that glory, because it had. Let me rephrase that. James and I, one of our conversations, I actually talked with James and I were discussing this. Had the 7th, especially 1st Battalion of the 7th, had the proper fire support, and what they could have done in 3rd Brigade sector, because the 3rd Brigade was down going from Barash out towards Beau.
Yep.
So you had, 2 battalions. What they could have done was pull a battalion from the 9th, a battalion from the 23rd, which was support battalions.
And these are 2nd Division Army regiments. Yeah.
That's 3rd Brigade sector. What they could have done was to pull the 2 support battalions, one from the 9th and one from the 23rd, to support the 1st Battalion of the 7th. So let 1-7 be the assault element, and then have the 2 battalions from 3rd Brigade go in there, to support their main attack. Okay. And prior to the H hour, it just hammered that part of the woods for like maybe 4 to 5 hours straight. I mean, just pounded with 75s and 155s. And I think had they gone that route, the 7th would have pulled it off, and they would have actually took the northern part of Belleau Wood. They would have done.
And we say this because you got to think what happens as soon as the Marines come in. They're given a heavy bombardment, just like Stevens, and then the Marines take the northern section of the woods and then declare we're the greatest. The 7th Infantry could have done that too, but they weren't given that artillery. And we've seen this when we talked about Blancmont. The failure was in the brigade to fail to provide the support needed for the attack. And I did find the quote. It's from Captain I.R. Williams. He was of Company C. And I think his quote just defines this issue. He wrote, to me, who lost 24 out of the 47 men I took in that place, it's a sore point. We failed to take the hill, but we did not lose any ground. With a proper artillery preparation and a carefully planned attack, instead of an attack planned and executed in the darkness, the 250 casualties of the 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry would not have been in vain. So even the captains are complaining of this absolute lack of leadership from the 4th Brigade, who are not giving them planned attacks or not giving them the support, and they're bitter. I mean, they're losing their men left and right, and they see it as the command's fault, which it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's also interesting to me that it was a problem not in the first days of the 7th being in line. Like I could imagine, that one unit relieving another. There's like the passage of lines and all of that, and it's pretty complicated. And I bet it's even doubly complicated when your troops are pretty new to soldiering.
Mike, when on that subject, you're right on it, because the thing is what they should have done was to have better coordination with the handoff. And the thing is, the 7th Infantry Regiment, they actually fell under the operation control of the 5th Marine Regiment, which under Colonel Neville. He bears a lot of responsibility as well, as James stated earlier, not being there, supporting the 7th in there, making sure they got plenty of ammunition, they got food, water, casualty evacs. They didn't do that. And Neville, he bears a lot of responsibility on this also. So he's not getting out of this scot clean either.
Right. Yeah, it's just funny that I could understand the first night maybe there's no chow, or there's even not enough artillery, but the second night, the third night, the whole time the 7th is in line.
Well, it basically what James wrote in the article. It's basically they just hey, here you guys go, we're out of here. They basically what it was.
Yeah.
And the only support that the 7th actually got, and I feel sorry for these guys, was like the 23rd Machine Gun Company, 15th Machine Gun Company, 77th from the 6th Machine Gun Battalion, the Marine Machine Gun Battalion. Those guys have been stuck there. They couldn't leave, because the 5th, the line regiments and battalions for the 5th and 6th Marines, yeah, they got pulled off. But the machine gun crews, they got stuck out there. And they suffered just as much as the 7th did. And that story never gets talked about. So, but yeah, it's basically like James said earlier. It's like, hey, hey, you got to show up. Hey, here you go. Just watch this for us. Hey, we're out of here. See you in a couple days.
Yeah, it just goes back a lot of many times when I'm working on the podcast and covering the Mizargon and the AEF, I find myself thinking a lot of like this would never happen today in the military, and I
no,
yeah,
oh God, no.
Yeah, and I think like man, like with the doughboys, like wow, man, these poor guys, like they provided the very expensive, brutally expensive lessons that the Army had to learn of like, hey, you've got to feed your guys regularly. You've got to bring in heavy artillery. You've got to pound the enemy almost out of existence before you can attack that ground. But all of these lessons had to be learned on the backs of thousands of doughboys, unfortunately, doughboys and Marines.
And then in cases like this, those lessons get forgotten as we go down the road. Because I mean, then like I said, when we did, and I wrote the second half of it, the whole point was because we want to tell the story of these men, because the military side of it's one thing, right? And that the military needs to learn these lessons, and they fuck up, and that happens.
Yeah.
But it's the other side, the public side, the civilian side. That's the stuff that we're talking about with these bigger picture things. Like when we're teaching Belleau Wood in class, the Marine Corps doesn't talk about the fact that 7th Infantry was there. And it's forgotten in a lot of things. And these men knew it. I mean, and another quote I put in here, it was from the 3rd Division's paper, The Watch on the Rhine. And it's when they were in Germany. Yeah. So this is 1919.
Yeah, part of the occupation now.
Right. And they're writing, because there's been a lot of issues about the newspapers all talking about the Marines and Belleau Wood. Well, they wrote an article, and in it, they wrote, the purpose of exposing the falsity of these stories that have occurred so frequently in the magazines and newspapers is certainly not to discredit the work of the Marines, for we know that they fought well. But it is important that this entanglement be straightened out before historians gather up these untrue, exaggerated, and often ludicrous records and use them as a basis for a history of the part of America played in the Great War, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
These falsities, these incorrect records. I mean, hell, with every podcast I've done with you, that's been the issue. People gather up the wrong records, and then the story is cemented over 100 years. And people forget. And then they don't want to believe it because that's not the history they were told. And it's up to historians to mention the fact that these people were there and to keep their memory. If we're going to celebrate Belleau Wood every year, the 7th Infantry needs to be included in that celebration every single year.
Right.
For their 250 casualties, those men that died in that wood that are not a part of the 2nd Division. They deserve the credit whenever you're sitting there talking about the brave men who fought and died here. You service to the memory of all of those soldiers.
No, agreed.
Well, there's one thing that James covered. I'll let James talk about this one. The 7th actually did take ground, but that was on the left flank. That was 3-7. James, tell them about that one.
That's the other side of it. 3-7. I told you 3-7. So I got them confused earlier. So 1 and 2nd Battalion, 1st, 2nd were in the wood. 3rd Battalion was on the left, but they're more in the open. They do manage to advance, and they take. And I'm going to forget it, but they took the town. Whenever one of these towns, it was
just south of Bussiers.
Okay. So they did manage to advance and take ground. They didn't have all the resistance the guys on the Wood did. So the 7th did technically take ground and accomplish, capturing more territory.
Yep.
But it's the men on the Wood that got the short end of the stick for it. So the 3rd didn't, and again, you never want to say they didn't take as many like it's some competition, but the 3rd had an easier time of it than the 1st and 2nd.
Yeah, more open ground, of course.
Yeah. And of course, then it's more bitter for those guys in the 1st and 2nd to be forgotten after they were, involved in all that. Because kind of like the 26th Division taking Belleau, they kind of get forgotten too. That no Marine ever stepped foot in the town of Belleau. It's the 26th Division, right? But we forget about that too, and we just talk about the Marines.
Right, right, and the whole Devil Dog Fountain is, I believe that was solidly in Yankee Division territory.
Yeah, it was. It's not even a bulldog. It's just whatever. It's some other breed, but yeah, but that fountain's been there since before World War One. So, yeah, it's part of this. It's the myth that the Corps has created, and that has been, and the Corps and the public. Mixing together.
No, and it just happens over time. I just saw somebody. I'm part of the Great War group, and part of an ongoing like online chat. Was somebody mentioned that one of I believe a gentleman mentioned that he was doing research for somebody who wanted to look into a family member who was in World War II, and the family story was he was part of an air bomber crew, and they got shot down by the Germans, and their family member died during the war. But once he dug into it, he had to break it to the family, like, no, actually he and his bomber crew died on a training accident. But like just the passage of the years, like, what happened to Uncle so and so, that photograph on the wall there, it's like, he died in the war. Like, wow, he was on a plane, he must have been shot down by the Germans, right?
Yeah, well, I've done that so many times with families. I had one, they told me, well, Grandpa was a Marine and he was shot 6 times by a machine gun at Belleau Wood. And he was in the hospital for a year and a half. I was like, okay, well, when I did the research, found his medical record. He was at Belleau Wood on June 6th during the advance. He took a piece of shrapnel to the right buttocks. Right, he took him, and which again, it was a serious wound because he was in the hospital for a year and a half. So it must have been close to the spine or something.
Yeah,
but he took a piece of shrapnel to the ass.
Yeah,
and the family story had evolved, and the grandpa got shot 6 times by a machine gun.
And it just happens, and it just happens.
It's the most common thing.
Yeah. And then the passage of time, it just gets cemented as reality, and it's like it makes me think of like I'm sure nobody believes this, but the French ace Georges Guinemer, like he disappeared. His body was never recovered.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I just read about him the other day.
Yeah, and the story that they would tell French school children was that his plane ascended directly into heaven.
Went to the cloud bank and disappeared.
Because he was a hero. Yeah, and it's like, I doubt any historian's going to put that in their book and back it up, but like, it's like that's what happens, man. Like these like legends just happen. But moving into that, speaking of legends, this was news to me. Is that in your article, James, you write about the Marines were initially given credit for not only capturing Belleau Wood, but they also took Chateau Thierry, which I was like, oh man, like you guys are just all over it. But obviously, guys, Chateau Thierry part is incorrect. So like what led to this error? And of course, that led to the 7th Infantry, post-war, in the occupation of Germany, writing in their unit newspaper, like, hey, like all of that is wrong,
Sure. Well, one, it's the issue with the sectors. I mean, it's the Chateau Thierry sector. So to say they took Belleau Wood, but it's actually an interesting part of the history of the war. They're not supposed to, the reporters are wanting good, juicy stories, but they're not allowed to say, the Marines are doing this, or, the Marines are doing this. So, because that would put them in the 2nd Division. So they can say soldiers, they can say artillery.
Right.
but they can't say the 2nd Division. Well, Belleau Wood happens, and a lot of these reporters want to put out that the Marines are there. But so they ask, well, we can say engineers, we can say artillery, we can say infantry. Why can't we say Marines? And someone at GHQ says, that's a good point. Yeah, you can say Marines. Well, when the cat's out of the bag, the Marines are only in the 2nd Division. So not only have we now outed where the 2nd Division is, but now the papers are flooded with the Marines. And of course, the Marine Corps needs a boost on their image during the war. So they hop to this immediately.
Right.
So all of a sudden, you get the stories of the Marines at Belleau Wood, the Marines at Chateau Thierry. When they're not in the city, they're just in the Chateau Thierry sector.
Right.
Right. So
And
that floods it.
And just real quick for listeners, Chateau Thierry and Belleau Wood are physically close by. They're
yeah, they're not too far from each other. But it makes sense. And then you get Floyd Gibbons, who is a big part of this. He's a Chicago Tribune correspondent, and he's there with the Marines at Belleau Wood. He's right on the front lines. He wants a good story. So he goes with Major Benjamin Barry and accompanies him on the battlefield. Well, an artillery shell lands there when they're watching it, and Gibbons loses his left eye. He's injured in the arm, crawls back to the line. But all of a sudden, he's now one of the biggest correspondent heroes in the country. And he was on the front line. So everyone wants to read his stories. And what does he talk about? The Marines, because that's who he was with. So Floyd Gibbons talks about how great the Marines are, how amazing they are, how the credit belongs to the Marine Corps for their fight at Belleau Wood. And so you end up with the press just attributing Belleau Wood fully to the Marines, which again, we're in the middle of a war, so they can't correct them, because that would be giving up positions and units and things that the Army won't do.
Right.
So, I understand. I'm not blaming the correspondents. I know they're using what they had.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why. The Army's not correcting them. The 3rd Division can't correct them because, again, that's giving up their positions.
Yeah.
So it's just, it circulates and circulates. And by the time censorship is lifted, it's too late. That story's been circulating for 6-7 months.
Right.
People are, and the Marines have adopted. I mean, that's when they start creating all those posters of the Marine bulldog chasing down a German dachshund. The Marines have fully embraced this myth of we're the devil dogs, we kick ass. But you can't change it. And so by the time the 3rd Division does have that opportunity to say, well, no, hang on, guys, we were there too, it's too late. You can't stop the ball once it's rolling. And I think Alexander Wolcott, who was one of the founders of the Stars and Stripes, he mentions about the Marines there that after the Marines got into the paper, it was a ball that just wouldn't stop. There was no way to take the ink off the paper, and there's no way to stop their hold over it. So it's nothing you can do. Yeah. You just have to hope that historians and people will pay attention to the other records, which of course didn't happen. So you're out of luck.
Yeah.
Because to really being honest, there's only a handful of authors that have mentioned it. I mean, George Clark did, the 3rd Division histories mention it, but there aren't a lot of books about Belleau Wood that mention the 7th Infantry.
Yeah. Yeah. So ultimately, what does the 7th Infantry's participation in the Battle for Belleau Wood, what does that demonstrate for military leaders today? I think you talked about in the very end of your article, which I have right here. So because it's very cool that in the Infantry Journal, your article appears in the Lessons from the Past. So I'm like, wow, man, it's so awesome to see Army officers today still reading about the doughboys and the Marines in World War I and drawing lessons. So so what is the 7th Infantry's participation like? What does that demonstrate for leaders today?
Well, it demonstrates the failures of poor leadership, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
The failures you don't want to repeat when trying to take a position. But in a broader sense, I think their participation really gives us an example of World War One. It's not a certain group, it's not the Marines. Belleau Wood, while everyone, again, the Marine Corps, Belleau Wood is like such a fascinating point because the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps all working together to capture this.
Right.
All three are there because we mentioned it before, but Marine Corps, all the corpsmen are Navy, right? So we've got Navy corpsmen, Marines, Army, all together, all at once, and this joint effort is what made it possible. But from a military standpoint, that's a big lesson. From a civilian standpoint, it's something we have to keep in mind when we're talking about history, is that this is never a one group does something. It is a joint effort all the time. I mean, even this, they're technically not even a part of the American Army. They're part of the French, right? So it's a joint effort with the French and the Americans.
Yep.
Right. So there's always a bigger picture to look at, and there's always stories that we need to dig up and find that maybe you hadn't thought of before. Look for statements, look for personal accounts, look for a unit that you may not think is in the area. Look at their unit history. Do some better research in order to tell the proper story of these men that we all dedicate our lives to talking about.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree anymore. And just to add to that, from the military side of things, reading an article, if I was a brand new, second lieutenant or a company commander going through which is now Fort Moore, at Building 4 down there, and you go through, advanced leaders course or captain's career course or whatever, and reading James' article, it would make you think that if you're going to be in that situation, if you're going to be cross-attached to another unit and you're leaving your parent unit, you should be self-contained. That means you should have enough ammunition. Let's say if it's a Bradley outfit, hey, load up extra cans of 25. Each track's going to have at least 4 cases of MREs. All the water jugs are filled because we don't know if we're going to get resupplied when we get there. So make sure, everything's up to snuff. Everybody knows the mission. When we get on the ground, get with the leadership of the unit you're relieving. So you do right seat, left seat, right, or whatever. So that way, when these guys pull out a sector, you're assuming that sector, you should already know what the mission is. We got enough supplies and ammunition on hand at least to get us through a week. Because I personally, I don't know if you have, but I have been in that situation. Yeah, I've had that happen more than me than once. Getting assigned to another unit, you're basically, thank God we did what we did. Because we loaded up all our stuff because we didn't know how it was going to be. And boy, it was like, yeah, I'm glad what we did because we got thrown to the wolves and we got no support, no nothing. And we were literally self-sustaining. I mean, had we not done what we did, we probably would have starved to death. So yeah, that should be the lesson from James's article to the future, platoon leaders and company commanders when we're reading that article. So yeah, these are some of the things that you need to be looking at if that ever happens to you. So but on the historical side, James pretty much covered it. But for the military side of it, yeah, this is what you need to do to make yourself more successful on that battlefield.
That's fantastic, Steve. Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Always go in prepared. You're pretty sure that unit might, that you're coming in under, they're going to take care of you, but always be prepared just in case they don't. Fantastic. Gentlemen, this has been a fantastic talk. And I look forward to your next myth-busting article. I suppose, I wonder if you guys are going to branch out to the French on the Marne. Are you now going to tell me that the taxis didn't have the determining?
No, that's the French, man. I just stay within my lanes to the AEF. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like that's all. Yeah. Like you deal with them. I got James. I got the AEF. That's all you, man.
Yeah. Well, okay. That, or like if you're gonna tell me that like the tooth fairy is not real, which is gonna be super.
Well, later down the road, maybe you get us back on again. Because something that James and I really want to do is kind of talk about with dealing with the 3rd Division, because they really don't get talked about, and they really don't, because the 3rd Division, being where they were at, they had their hands full just as much as the 2nd did. And, like particularly the Hill 204, the action up on the bend over by the aqueduct line, stuff like that. But like I said, working with James, I mean, it's been more than a pleasure and a godsend, because I can't give him more kudos than I can ever do. Like I said, because he's the one that's out there, looking at something and telling it the way it is. And you got readers out there, listeners out there, they get kind of perturbed. Say, oh my God, you threw Alvin York under the bus, or you're throwing the Marines under the bus. No, it's because it's the story that's been told for the last 100 years. It takes guys like James, myself, and a couple others out there to go in there and look at the subject and dissect it and say, okay, is this really what really happened? Well, apparently it's not. It's not quite true what's being told here for the last couple, 100 years. So, do we get pushback? Oh yeah, James and I definitely get some pushback and hate, but you know what? We stand by our guns.
There you go, man. There you go. And it's awesome. Like I said, these stories, like just like you said, like doesn't take away from the Marines, but it just shows like the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy were all involved in that battle, and it just highlights our strength of like when everybody's working together. This is how we get. This is how we get.
One thing to add to that, though, Mike. There's one thing I would like to see in the future, is if they ever do it. And James and I talked about this, is to get a memorial out in Belleau Wood, up near, not near the Marine Memorial, but in the woods, because there's a couple. If you ever go out there, there's a couple trails. They actually go out there and place a marker memorial to the men of the 7th Infantry Regiment, because they're just as deserving as the rest of the guys that were from the 4th Brigade that were there. And there's nothing there for them. And that's the only travesty that I have personally, because there's nothing out there that recognizes the sacrifices and the contributions that regiment made during that 8-day time period. Because they got 3 Distinguished Service Crosses, Silver Stars, hundreds of Purple Hearts for these guys that were there, but there's nothing out there for them. Nothing. And it takes, that's why I say I'm proud to work with James on this article, because it's the first step to doing that recognition. Because if you don't recognize them, they're going to fade into history.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and let's think about that 3rd Division episode. Happy to do that anytime. So thanks again, guys, and
thanks for having us.
We'll be
Thanks, Mike.
soon. All right.